When we were activated, we knew the situation was bad, worse than anyone knew. We are an elite, highly skilled group of embedded agents. They only call us when everything else has failed. We have no rules. We have no limits. Our job is to protect what remains. We are
The Division.
As far as graphics technology goes, The Division is one title that uses a lot of it. Make no mistake, despite being an open-world title, the game is a visual splendor across all platforms. Some may argue that The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is the best-looking open-world game this generation, and we're pretty confident that it comes close to achieving that position. But Ubisoft Massive's The Division comes pretty close too. Granted, its physics engine isn't up to the mark all the time, but there's no denying that despite all the downgrade drama that the game has gone through, The Division still remains an impressive-looking game. We sometimes wonder the possibilities of the E3 2013 build, but what can be done about it? We'll cover the comparison between the E3 and final build in another video, but to get the ball rolling, let's look at the PC version. As we mentioned previously in our beta analysis, The Division on PC surprisingly comes with a ton of graphical settings. You can adjust several different options, including but not limited to shadow quality, shadow resolution, spot shadow resolution, contact shadows, post-FX AA, temporal AA, local reflection quality, subsurface scattering, anisotropic filtering, parallax mapping, ambient occlusion, depth of field, object detail, and extra streaming distance. We'll cover some of these parameters in detail and how much they can impact the game's performance, but before that, Ubisoft suggested an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 970 or AMD Radeon R9 290 GPU and an Intel Core i7 3770 or AMD FX 8350 to run the game at recommended settings. It seems that the recommended specs are a bit unclear. What does recommended mean anyway? It ideally means that anyone with the recommended specs should be able to run the game at 1080p resolution and 60 frames per second. However, this isn't the case with The Division on PC. We tested the PC version on two different sets of hardware. The first set is an AMD FX 8350 and a Radeon R9 290 GPU, along with 8GB memory, which is exactly the same as the recommended requirements. So what kind of performance are we looking at here? Well, let's get this out of the way. You won't get a consistent 60 FPS ultra performance with this setup. As you can see here, the performance dips a lot. In short, the recommended settings will get you that most sought after 60 FPS only at high settings, but with frame dips. Moving on to our next set of test hardware, which consists of 16GB of memory, an Intel Core i7 5960X, and GeForce GTX 980 Ti. We were easily able to achieve a consistent 60 frames per second experience. However, this is a much more powerful setup, and for a game such as The Division, which is heavily bound to both the CPU and GPU, our machine was more than capable to power through the game. The Division on the PC in many ways made us wonder the kind of advantages DirectX 12 could have, especially given its nature to reduce the work process between the CPU and GPU. This could have seriously improved performance in a big way. We haven't heard about any plans for a DirectX 12 version of The Division, but it will be an intriguing option if the developers opt for that approach. On a side note, we have heard reports that the game's SLI support is not up to speed, and players are facing all kinds of performance issues. And although we haven't tested an SLI configuration ourselves, there are reports out there that verify this. So how can you achieve a consistent 60 FPS experience at the recommended specs? As we mentioned before, Ubisoft have included a plethora of graphical settings, and this makes The Division a highly scalable game. If you're among those who don't like tinkering with various settings, we suggest opting to play the game at high settings. This automatically gives you a 60 FPS experience in most places within the world, but expect a few drops. So what exactly can we change in the settings to give us a more consistent frame rate? Before we jump into this, we must point out that there are some texture streaming issues in the game, and for some reason, we found it to be more prominent on high settings compared to ultra. We're not sure why this happens, but if we have to guess, the answer lies within the game's graphical settings. If you look closely, the game lacks a texture quality setting. This is replaced by two complex settings in object detail and extra streaming distance. Depending on how strong your hardware specifications are and the way you set up these options may result in pop-in and texture streaming issues. Now there's quite a strange thing going on within the Snowdrop engine. At any moment of time, the game utilizes 3/4 of your video memory. A majority of them are utilized for other game assets, leaving the engine with less or limited memory for texture work. In short, if you really want high-resolution textures without pop-in and texture streaming issues, you at least need a 6GB GPU. If you ask us, this is mediocre optimization on the developer's end, if nothing else. These pop-in and texture streaming issues are quite annoying, and after witnessing them a couple of times ourselves, this could be an experience killer for some players. Hopefully, Ubisoft patches this out soon. Coming back to the graphical settings, you may want to dial back ambient occlusion, contact shadows, shadow quality, shadow resolution, and spot shadow count from high to medium. You'll immediately see a bump in performance just by tweaking these parameters. However, if you want to keep these options to their highest settings, then we suggest lowering down volumetric fog, reflection quality, and post-FX-AA to high settings. Additionally, you can also try lowering object detail and extra streaming distance, which may improve performance even further. On a side note, we also witnessed screen tearing while running the game at recommended settings. Although this was only present during the game's cutscenes and not during gameplay, it's still something that Ubisoft needs to fix. Overall, we're quite pleased with the PC build of the game. Yes, the requirements are hefty, and performance is a bit dodgy at recommended settings, but players with capable hardware should have no issues with the game. For weaker systems, performance boosts can be achieved by playing around with the settings, but there's no denying that a patch or two, especially for the way the game's engine renders its textures and handles pop-ins, should fix this in what is one of 2016's best-looking games so far.
Target is secure. No more hostiles detected.
If you like what we're doing, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. See you soon!